Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's exact 7:30 Bangkok time, and I think with the permission of Chair, I'd like to start the very last keynote session of the two-day event. I can't believe that we're almost towards the end of this humongous and very, very exciting program. So without taking much time, I'd like to introduce the keynote session 4. The pandemic challenges and road to recovery of education system currently happening in the plenary hall. This is to also inform that we are going live on YouTube for our very last keynote session. And joining along with me, I am Nishma Tuladar. Very proud that I'm getting to welcome all of you again to the second International Symposium on Disaster Resilience and Sustainable Development, Keynote Session 4, The Pandemic Challenges and Road to Recovery of Education System. Joining along with me, I have two rapporteurs along with me, Mr. Jiten Kumar and Mr. Ganesh Dhungana. So without further ado, let me first introduce the session moderator for this very session. We have Professor Sangam Shrestha. He's the professor and the head of Department of Civil and Infrastructure Engineering and the program chair of Water Engineering and Management Program at AIT. He's also the visiting professor of Beijing Normal University in China, University of Yamanashi in Japan, National University of Laos, and SEI Associate of the Stockholm Environment Institute. Over to you, Professor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nesma, and I would like to welcome everyone to this keynote session. I think this is the last session in this international symposium, but very, very important session. All of you know that many of the sectors are affected by this COVID-19 pandemic. And I think this education system is heavily affected. And you can see, we are meeting online, and also all the universities and schools, they are also, teaching through various online platforms, right? So that's why this keynote session will be very, very important. I would like to invite our session chair, who will be moderating the keynote session, Dr. Jita Saveswari. And please allow me to introduce very briefly. Dr. Jita Saveswari is an internationally recognized expert in the field of socio-ecological risk assessment, ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, and ecosystem-based adaptation, with a focus on low-lying coastal areas such as river deltas. Dr. Saveswari holds a PhD in environmental science from Karl von Ossietzky University in Oldenburg, Germany. She also holds an MSc in history and also author or co-authors of several international peer-reviewed publications. Dr. Saveswari has a role of Deputy Director of UNU Institute for Environment and Human Security, which is popularly called UNU EHS. And concurrently, she is head of UNU EHS Academic Section for Environmental Vulnerability and Ecosystem Services. So with this very brief introduction, I would like to request Dr. Zita to chair this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Shrestha, and warm welcome to everyone. A good evening if you're in Bangkok, or good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. This session is so important, talking about the education system, talking about the role of research and education and addressing recovery and systemic risk context. I am very attached to this topic as I am heading UNU's academic board for the Master of Science program on Geography of Environmental Risk of the United Nations University. So this is a topic I was confronted with for the last 1.5 years already. And to give the discussion maybe a positive spin at the beginning. So Of course, there have been many impacts, but also opportunities. So chairing a board for a master program, which is actually focusing on disaster risk. Of course, for us, it was very important to look also how actually we can inform better decision making, how students can contribute, how do we need to change our thinking around risk and risk reduction. What does it mean to be in the middle of such a systemic risk situation, which is now kind of our joint global experience? This is a unique opportunity to actually understand globally what does it mean to address, to having the need to address systemic risk. So just to give you two little examples, if you remember the huge blast in Beirut port. So the blast not only killed and injured many people directly, but it also led to rising numbers of COVID infections. So the health system was overwhelmed to dealing with these two challenges at the same time. Also a bit closer to Bangkok, I'm sure you remember when Cyclone Amphan struck in May 2020. So dealing with the cyclone compounded with pandemic restrictions and its consequences in terms of livelihood generation and agriculture production, but also having overcrowded shelters and rising numbers of COVID infections. So in terms of education, I believe it was a year of struggles, but also opportunities in terms of topics, new topics and new engagement. And I listened into the very first keynote session of this conference. Professor Shaw emphasized that many young scholars, young researchers actually gained access to conferences such as this one because it's now online and globally accessible. I hope many of them could actually join also this session and that you will have some takeaway from this discussion. But without further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker, Professor Dilanti Amaratunga, to deliver her talk. She leads the Global Disaster Resilience Center at the University of Huddersfield in the UK. Her group is focusing on disaster management portfolios. Among her many leadership roles, she is the Joint Chief Editor of the International Journal of Disaster Resilience in the Built Environment. And she's also the chair of the International Conference on Building Resilience. In 2019, she won the prestigious Newton Prize, which recognizes the best research and innovation projects. So I would like to welcome Professor Amaratunga. The floor is yours. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And first of all, I think thank you very much for inviting me to talk on this important topic. Yeah, all right. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank the organizing team, particularly sort of Dr. Indrajit for inviting me to talk at the conference, and also sort of giving a lot of our young researchers to present their work at the conference. I think it is such a useful platform for upcoming researchers, senior people, and also sort of other stakeholders from different organizations to come together via these online platforms. So thank you very much. So with that in mind, of course, my topic is actually to talk a bit about education as a tool for disaster risk reduction and sustainable development, maybe through some examples and to sort of highlight the importance. I'm not going to actually go through who I am. Of course, the session chair gave an introduction. So the outline of my short talk is going to be on, of course, I'm sure you have heard a lot about the core conference themes, which are the Sustainable Development Goals and the DRR. But in setting the scene, I want to sort of create the links between by posing this question: what do they mean by for the meaning of Sustainable Development Goals for DRR? So that is actually the brief introduction, and then to talk about the specific role of education in SDGs, and also the education aspects in DRR, and then to combine the two and to discuss some of the opportunities as I see for education in unmaking disasters. So that is actually the outline of my short talk. So I suppose this has been emphasized throughout this conference, but I will be emphasizing it again. DRR, or the disaster risk reduction, is critical to achieving the SDGs. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So I have actually given some statistics to justify this statement. For example, about 90% of disasters are climate related. We know that, don't we? And also observing that these disasters push about 26 million people into poverty annually, and the cost of the world economy, it costs the world economy about 520 billion per annum. Within that backdrop, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development very highly promotes the resilience and disaster risk reduction as a foundation for sustainable development. Bearing in mind I suppose the rationale for titling this conference also sort of behind that very important aspect. And also it is important to emphasize that the DRR cuts across different aspects and sectors of development. For example, if you sort of take the SDGs, I'm not going to go through what they are, because there were several sessions that were specifically focused on SDGs. But out of the 17 SDGs, about 7 are actually DRR related, and also about 10, DRR related, and also out of all the targets, about 25 targets are directly related to DRR. So I just want to emphasize the importance of DRR and the meaning of DRR within the overall context of sustainable development goals. And also, sort of, I think it is good to emphasize that the threat of disasters they carry to the global sustainable development agenda is very clear. And again, throughout this conference, it has been emphasized and re-emphasized again and again. And also, sort of, add to that, it has been widely acknowledged that managing risk will be integral in pursuit of sustainable development. So the entire equation of linking disasters and sustainable development is built around this notion. So in that sense, I think, simply put it, in my view, sustainable development goals cannot be achieved unless disaster risk is reduced. So that is actually what I want to emphasize here. And add to that, the former head of UNDRR in 2017 actually sort of brought in the impact of disasters towards achieving sustainable development goals. So he said up to 300 to 400 billion economic cost is due to the foregone development opportunities, due to a poor risk-informed situations. And also he emphasized very firmly that focus on prevention, saying it is inconceivable that we will achieve the sustainable development goals if we don't get a handle on reducing disaster risk, of course, including climate change. This actually very clearly emphasizes the need to address disaster risk in achieving the key components of sustainable development. So in that sense, this overall concept of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development formally recognizes the urgent need to reduce the risk of disasters. And also, there are specific opportunities to reduce opportunities to achieve SDGs through reducing disaster risk. Of course, it is not my intention to go through all SDGs and to show you how DRR is affecting all of them because of the time limitations, but I will actually just get just one example just to demonstrate the SDGs through the lens of DRR. So I have I have taken SDG number 13 as the example here, which is actually take urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. So how can we link this particular SDG to DRR? So climate change magnifies disaster risk. We all know that, don't we? And also, and through changing temperatures, precipitation and sea levels, global climate change is modifying hazard levels and increasing disaster risk, which is actually it has been mentioned and said and proven several times. So since 1980, weather-related hazards have accounted for about 74%, and the economic cost associated with that is $2.6 trillion. You can sort of see the magnitude of that. And also the total is 87% of total disasters and 61% of total lives lost are due to weather-related hazards. So in that sense, the number of weather-related hazards have tripled, and the number of people living in flood-prone areas, for example, and cyclone-exposed coastlines have also doubled. So in that sense, you can actually see the direct link between this particular SDG and the climate-related hazards and the DRR. Similarly, this is just I just want to show you one example here, but same thing can be said about the rest of the 16 SDGs also. There are very specific examples that we can demonstrate, clearly elaborating the links between achieving those SDGs with the input of DRR. So, getting back to the concept of education, what is the role of education in SDG? I suppose, education is a human right and a force for sustainable development and peace. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Every goal in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development requires education to empower people with the knowledge, skills, and values to live in dignity, build their lives, and contribute to their society. There's absolutely no doubt about the role that the education should be playing. So in that sense, providing the right information and education can change people's values and behaviors. And also it will encourage them to adopt more sustainable lifestyles. It can also break the cycle of poverty, malnutrition, and disease that affects so many people worldwide. So of course, I'm stating the obvious here, the importance of the role of education in SDGs. So within the SDG, if it's the SDG number 4 is very much on quality of education. Education in that sense is a core to sustainable development, improving overall quality of the life and securing a successful future. So that is why SDG, there's one specific SDG which has been allocated to education, and it has 4 key targets to meet as 4.1, 4.2, 3, and 4.5, but I'm not going to go through them in quite a bit of detail because there were a lot of discussions about these topics. So if I sort of move the discussion slightly over to education and the DRR, of course, education and SDGs are directly linked, and it is obvious then the education and the DRR are directly linked as well. So education plays an instrumental role in building the knowledge, skills, and attitudes necessary to reduce disaster risk. There's absolutely no argument about that. And also more critically, education play a role in preventing disasters by addressing disaster risks that are integral to development rather than focusing on disaster risk as an external threat to development. This is extremely important point. Disasters being integral to development rather than as an external force. So the goal of education in relation to disasters need to be a shift from managing disasters. This point I really want to emphasize. Managing disasters as they happen to managing risk before disasters unfold. This is extremely important. The entire rationale behind 2030 Agenda is based on DRR and the prevention and the preparedness planning, rather than responding once a disaster takes place. So I suppose while school systems typically take the initiative on educational material development and engagement, it is equally relevant for us to see the bigger picture and to sort of see how we can develop educational materials which will fit into the needs of the governments, the businesses, civil society actors, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, what role does education have in reducing vulnerabilities to disaster? So in my view, it can influence disaster vulnerability as a capacity to anticipate, cope with, resist, and recover from natural hazard in direct and indirect ways. For example, indirectly, education gives individuals and households access to material, information, and social resources which can help reducing disaster vulnerability. Even the small role that social media, it is not correct to say it is a small role, it's a substantial role social media plays in providing education to general public cannot be underestimated. So getting back to the opportunities for education as a tool for disaster risk reduction and sustainable development, I want to sort of discuss these opportunities under 5 topics. The first one is linking research, education, and action. The second one is integrate all hazards, stakeholders, and disciplines. And the third point I want to cover is collaborate regionally and globally. And the fourth point is facilitate policy dialogue, knowledge sharing, and capacity development. And the fifth one is to develop the need to develop flexible and customizable education programs. So these are the opportunities I want to share with you as using education as a tool for DRR and sustainable development. So let's take one at a time. So if we take the link research and education and action, the prime focus must be that the policy science gap is closed with research that can be translated to action. I suppose this was emphasized through several presentations this morning and also yesterday. Research studies document a trend of increasing disaster losses, but the translation of research findings into practical action has proven difficult and remains a barrier that prevents the best use of science. That has been emphasized and discussed at various forums in greater detail. So there remains a recognized need for education, in my view, through researchers and educators to provide and communicate actionable knowledge with explicit links to inform effective, evidence-based decision-making, as well as creating new knowledge. Higher education has a vital role to play, in my view, in capacity development, and in doing so, providing a means by which effective knowledge transfer can take place. So this, the three-way knowledge sharing is extremely important. So that is what I mean by linking research, education, and action. If I go to the second point that I want to emphasize, that is actually integrate all hazards, stakeholders, and the disciplines. So in that sense, having this multi-dimensional thinking, the multidisciplinary approach, the multi-hazard approach, and the multi-stakeholder approach is extremely important. So in that sense, the higher education institutions, the funders, and the publishers and editors must not reinforce disciplinary silos. This is extremely important. In that sense, I think a conference of this nature has provided such a valuable platform for researchers, both upcoming and experienced, come together and to share their experiences in front of a common platform. Of course, promoting this multidisciplinary approach, multi-hazard approach, and also the multi-stakeholder approach. So the third point that I want to emphasize is actually collaborate regionally and globally. Of course, this is actually very much part of today's education systems. Continue regional global initiatives that promote collaboration is very much part of education. And also within that, international cooperation and global partnership plays a huge role. That is how, for example, we all are linked to each other, particularly during this pandemic situation. And promoting the collaborations between regional and globally. What I see is that the current regional networks need to collaborate more and to form, for example, a global higher education network that can influence strategic agendas. Global networks also need to collaborate with other policymakers such as the UN, and also, very importantly, across countries. And also, we shouldn't forget about coordination mechanisms for education, such as delivering joint research programs and education programs, and so on and so forth. So the fourth one is, this is extremely important as well, facilitate policy dialogue, knowledge sharing, and capacity development. So there need to be greater priority towards sharing and disseminating scientific information. In doing so, open access should be a priority. I hope that you agree with me if I say that the recent shift towards open access of research outputs and education is to be welcomed and should continue to be encouraged. This will be a huge bonus for researchers and all other stakeholders who are based in developing countries, for example, who haven't got enough resources to have continuous access. But open access facilities will provide them access to knowledge and capacity development. And the next point that I want to emphasize is there's a great need to understand the language of policymakers. Of course, at the moment, there's a barrier between the scientific language and the policymakers' language. So there need to be kind of systems in place in order to fill those barriers. And the next one is, I suppose, the aggregator of knowledge to improve access and focus on quality. Focus on quality is once again very, very important. That is actually perhaps the negative side of the open access system also. There need to be very high level quality control. It shouldn't be, the open access shouldn't be actually used as a platform to just publish whatever we want without having any quality control system. So in that sense, having the focus on quality is very, very important. And the next one is actually the common language. The meaning of that is actually the science provides an evidence base that can be relevant and therefore draw together different areas of policy. So we all need to be understanding this common language between various stakeholders in the field of DRR and sustainable development. So the last point that I want to emphasize is the need to develop flexible and customizable education programs. We need to be moving towards these options. I suppose in that sense, COVID actually provided a kind of a blessing in a disguise, in my view. A lot of countries who were not geared towards online delivery actually didn't have a choice but to develop their systems in order to cater the situation that they face. So in that sense, I think disaster management is an expanding field, but simultaneously, a lack of young professionals with appropriate skills and knowledge to support the building of resilience with relevant stakeholders has been an issue. So in that sense, platforms like this conference actually provides the upcoming researchers to understand the importance of this area and to develop the relevant skills. And also, I think it is fair to say there are a lot of programs exist, but I have my doubts whether they actually meet the employer needs. Because of that, there need to be market needs analysis to understand the needs of employers so that the educational programs can be customized to meet the needs of the employers. Thus, I think this is actually directly linked to the immaturity of the discipline up to a certain extent in my view. So in that sense, higher education has to develop flexible and customizable programs and curricula, whether a module in regular master's or undergraduate curriculum or as dedicated postgraduate programs. This is actually extremely important. By doing so, we can actually promote multidisciplinary approaches. We can actually promote, we can bring in new theory for field experiences, and also we can draw upon state of the art. And of course, we shouldn't forget about the importance of capturing the traditional knowledge from indigenous communities that needs to be included within educational materials. So to conclude my short talk about the use of education as a tool for DRR and the SDGs, I suppose these are the key points that I want to highlight today. Education on disasters had tended to focus on disaster response and recovery, as we all know. In most of the countries, that is how it works. But it is necessary for us to take proactive actions to reduce disaster risk and increase preparedness. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And also, disaster risk is framed as an external event, but we need to take that as very much part of an integrated view into development patterns. And also, we have to focus more on interlinking DRR, sustainable development, and of course, climate change. This has been emphasized throughout the conference by so many presenters, which is very, very good to see. And also, it is important to sort of use of a holistic, all-hazard, risk-based problem-solving approach to address the multifactorial and interdependent nature of disaster risk. Of course, we are in a situation where interdependent of risk is extremely important and really needs to be captured as part of the disaster risk chain. And also, in order to build disaster resilience in societies, education will need to reframe how disaster risk can be understood and reduced. That is why I talked about the need to have customizable education programs and curricula. And also, other point is, we shouldn't forget about the need to have all-inclusive approach. We need to reflect all stakeholders are fully accounted for, including, for example, women and girls. So, but not only that, disabled people and so on and so forth, all other categories of people. So, all-inclusive approach is extremely important. And also, last but not least, conducting a periodic review of knowledge needs is really important if we are to use education as a tool to unpack disasters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Amaratunga. Thank you for your nice presentation. Looking at the clock, we are running a little bit late, but let's take one question at this time, and then we go to the second speaker, and hopefully we will have a little bit time thereafter still. I see that there are two questions in the chat box. The second is more a comment, a congratulation. The first one, and there's a question. So it's about specific situation in India, and looking into the fact that while there are multiple goals and targets and many different ways how we can invest our resources, and if you would have some insight how specifically for India those resource allocation taking into account educational aspirations could be done. It's a difficult question.
Oh, it's I think resource allocation, that's actually a it can be quite contentious also, if I'm going to actually talk about resource allocations again, I suppose, the resource allocations can happen in various stages. For example, it can be internal sort of resource allocations, and also it can be externally based. So in that sense, I suppose what is important is having that balance based on the needs of the country. I think that is extremely important. There need to be, again, that is why I suppose I emphasize the fact that conducting a periodic review of knowledge needs is really important. So in that sense, resources can be allocated based on that needs analysis, be it internal resources or external resources. So I suppose the key is, to me, carrying out a periodic review of knowledge needs, actually, Zita. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. So looking at the clock, I would thank you very much for your presentation and for the nice answer you provided. And I would invite our second speaker, Mr. Soichiro Yashikawa, to take the floor. But before we start, I would like to give a short introduction. Mr. Yashikawa is a program specialist for disaster risk reduction and resilience at the section for Earth Sciences and Geohazard Risk Reduction of UNESCO in Paris. He joined UNESCO already in 2013 and has been in charge of geohazard risk reduction and coordination of DRR activities across different sectors in UNESCO. He really promotes multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder, and multi-hazard approaches. So it speaks very nicely to the previous speaker's call for strengthening education for these approaches. Before joining UNESCO, he worked at the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, and in the Cabinet Office of the Japanese government on DRR and urban territorial planning and international cooperation. So we will hear a presentation about UNESCO's contribution to the SDGs and to the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Mr. Yashikawa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jita, for your introduction. And before I start my keynote, I would like to share with you like a 3-minute video, which summarizes what UNESCO is doing on disaster risk reduction beyond education. But I think it's a good. Thank you.
Earthquakes, tsunamis, landslides, volcanoes, floods, cyclones, droughts. These natural hazards can turn into disasters if we are not well prepared. Over the last 20 years, disasters have claimed more than 1.35 million lives and displaced around 4 billion people from their homes. Water-related disasters accounted for 90% of the most severe disasters that have occurred since 1990, while earthquakes and tsunamis caused around 60% of fatalities. UNESCO supports its member states in building more resilient societies through the implementation of international agreements such as the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. UNESCO's efforts in disaster risk reduction particularly contribute to its global priorities, Africa and small island developing states. Science, technology and innovation enable us to understand the risks we face and provide relevant solutions. UNESCO uses Earth observation and crowdsourced data for hazard mapping and forecasting at local level, making it publicly available. This also includes citizen science, participatory research, and local and indigenous knowledge. Technology also enables informing people in advance about an impending hazard, saving lives and reducing damages. UNESCO supports the strengthening of countries' capabilities in establishing, maintaining, and improving early warning systems on tsunamis, floods, droughts, and earthquakes. During earthquakes, collapsing structures are responsible for 80% of casualties. This is why UNESCO supports countries with better building codes and building control policies in order to ensure safer construction. School buildings are particularly important so that learning continuity is assured and children are protected from disaster risk. UNESCO supports countries securing learning facilities, developing school disaster management, and improving education for disaster risk reduction. Disasters affect culture in all its forms. This includes tangible and intangible heritage, the cultural and creative economy, and UNESCO-designated sites. However, all of these can also be used as a tool to address the underlying risk drivers and to support societies in preparing and responding for the impacts of disasters. Hazards are common in the natural world. UNESCO promotes the use of nature-based solutions, such as investing in soil and habitat restoration to reduce disaster risk and facilitate recovery. In the aftermath of a disaster, and together with other UN agencies and international partners, UNESCO assists countries in the post-disaster response by assessing damage and losses and in identifying recovery and reconstruction needs. To ensure the success of all these actions, it is key to engage every stakeholder in disaster risk reduction, creating healthy and safe communities. UNESCO promotes civil society engagement, such as youth and gender in DRR planning and implementation. With these global actions, Unesco, through its sectors and field offices, and together with its network of partners and experts, helps societies to anticipate and cope with disasters, while contributing to the global efforts of the United Nations system to accelerate action towards reaching the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes, thank you very much, dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It is with great pleasure that I'm part of the very last keynote session for the second International Symposium on Disaster Resilience and Sustainable Development. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. To begin with, I would like to express my deepest condolence to the victims and those affected by the different natural hazards happening around the globe right now. Eruption of a La Sofrerino volcano in San Vincent and Grenadine in Caribbean seas that forces more than 200,000 habitats to evacuate. Also a consistent overflow of the Lake Tanganyika in Burundi in Africa, where coastal habitats around 500 meters from the lake have been soaked since 2020. This demonstrates once again that this kind of disaster spare no one and affect every country on the planet. I think we have similar statistics, but every year millions of people are affected by disaster that claim lives, cause severe infrastructure damage, and exacerbate the poverty conditions of the most vulnerable. From 1998 to 2017, disasters claimed 1.3 million lives, affected 4.4 billion people worldwide, and pushing 26 million people into poverty every year. In recent years, climate change has amplified the occurrence of extreme weather events, leading to an increasing number of weather-related disasters. A reality reflected in the numbers. Over the last 20 years, the overwhelming majority, around 90% of disasters, have been caused by floods, storms, heat waves, and other weather-related events. But today, beyond the education system, I would like to highlight how UNESCO supports its member states across the world to reduce their exposure to natural hazards and stress the importance of disaster risk reduction, emphasizing our commitment to the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals. The COVID-19 pandemic has vastly disrupted socio-economic activities globally. Biological hazards such as epidemics are addressed in the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030. It became evident that the global community was not prepared for an event of this scale. It is time to act decisively on biological hazard by applying a multidimensional risk management approach, as we already do for other natural hazards such as earthquakes or floods. The likelihood of their overall occurrence is on the rise due to the climate change, but also as a result of poorly implemented development strategies that lead to high urban pressure, deforestation, underdevelopment, economic inequality, and lack of preparedness. These factors are increasingly transforming natural hazards into life-threatening disasters with severe economic impacts. With the number of people in urban areas exposed to cyclone estimated to increase twofold to 680 million people, and those at risk of suffering major earthquake increasing from 370 to 870 million people by 2020. Disaster risk reduction policies are of paramount importance. With a Sendai Framework for DRR provides a roadmap for disaster risk reduction, other global agendas including the Sustainable Development Goals, Paris Agreement, and the New Urban Agenda have targets that cannot be attained without DRR. There are intimate links between these international instruments. Ladies and gentlemen, UNESCO plays a crucial role in building a global culture of resilience by supporting its member states in the implementation of these global agendas, operating the interface between natural and social sciences, education, culture, and communication. UNESCO provides a forum for experts to work together, offering essential technical and policy advice to its member states, convening its different sectors, field offices, Category 1 and 2 centers, UNESCO chairs, and networks. UNESCO also collaborates intensively with other UN agencies to support the member states in a coordinated manner. Our contribution is focused on 8 thematics shown in the video you have just seen. These are early warning system, science, technology, and innovation, built environment, education, school safety, ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction for culture, post-disaster response, and risk governance and social science. During 2020, 24 countries were supported by UNESCO in strengthening disaster and climate risk-informed cross-sectoral development strategies and plans, prioritizing small islands and African countries. At the same time, 26 countries received expert support from UNESCO to strengthen their early warning system for tsunami, flood, and earthquakes. In this field, the International Geoscience Program plays an important role, and there are currently several projects assessing seismic risk and infrastructure vulnerability in Africa, Latin America, and Haiti. Other projects are focused on reducing landslide risks in glacier areas or volcanic eruption risk. UNESCO also works to strengthen education and capacity building related to hydrological extremes such as floods and drought, helping member states to assess and monitor changes in snow and glacier, key indicators of climate change. The Intergovernmental Hydrological Program is involved in multiple DRR activities with a focus on flood and drought early warning system, and these activities will be showcased during this online meeting. This year, the UNESCO IOC Intergovernmental Oceanographic Committee, UNDRR, and partners planned that the World Tsunami Awareness Day campaign to start in June following a formal adaptation of a recommendation at the IOC UNESCO Assembly on June 25, 2021, to include tsunami risk reduction in the safe ocean outcome of the UN Ocean Decade. The 2021 World Tsunami Awareness Day is highlighting the role that the international cooperation has played and continue to play in promoting efforts to reduce tsunami risk through initiatives such as expansion and maintenance of tsunami early warning systems across the world's oceans. The UNESCO IOC Tsunami Ready program, inclusion of tsunami risk national and local strategies for DRR, and the partnership for strengthening school tsunami preparedness in Asia Pacific supported. All these disaster risk reduction actions need a strong educational component, which at UNESCO is included in Education for Sustainable Development, ESD, framework, of which UNESCO is the leading agency. ESD, Education for Sustainable Development, aims at providing the knowledge, skill, values, and attitudes required to achieve sustainable development. This includes skills to anticipate risks and respond to disasters. Every year, on the International DRR Day and World Tsunami Awareness Day, UNESCO reaches out to over 11,700 members of its associated school network, ASPNet, to promote school-level actions to protect lives, as well as to spread good practices through teachers and students and across communities. Moreover, UNESCO is leading global efforts toward strengthening education system resilience by enhancing capacities to identify hazard risks and plan to mitigate the impact of emergencies on the access to quality and safe education of all children and youth. In collaboration with UIS and the IIEP and humanitarian partners, context-specific support is being provided in Chad, Ethiopia, South Sudan toward adapting education information system, including EMIS, to be risk-informed and effective crisis-sensitive education planning. UNESCO is also leading pioneering case study research and country support on the nexus between climate change, displacement, and education, focusing on areas of the world where education is most affected by the climate crisis. Let me finish in a few sentences. But culture is often forgotten in DRR, but UNESCO believes that it has an important role to play and has been providing assistance to a number of countries, especially through its Heritage Emergency Fund, in reinforcing preparedness and responding to disasters which may affect or have affected cultural heritage, providing them with technical guidance and tools, as well as capacity building training. Since its establishment in 2015, the Heritage Emergency Fund has supported 66 emergency activities in more than 100 countries. Such activities include urgent stabilization of historic buildings and preparation of 3D documentation of historic areas in Beirut, which were affected by the port explosion last year. Emergency assessment mission to Sudan after the floods of the River Niles, or more recently, damage assessment, urgent interventions, inventory, and supported to post-disaster needs assessment for St. Vincent and Grenadines after the volcano eruption. All these activities to help member states to prepare for and respond to disasters are very important, as culture and heritage are the core of people's identity and help countries and communities to recover from disasters. Taking this opportunity, I would like to encourage you to contribute to the Heritage Emergency Fund to protect culture and heritage in emergencies. So based on its intersectoral approach, UNESCO will continue to play a catalyst for international, interdisciplinary cooperation in many aspects of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, contributing with this to address the Sendai priorities, including 7 targets. I didn't focus enough on education system in my keynote, but I would like to engage with you in the discussion on the educational perspective. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation and also for keeping the time. So we have a few more minutes for questions, and at the moment there are no questions yet. So I will start with one question, which is actually to both speakers. So I would like to reflect with you a little bit on the title of this session, which is the pandemic challenges and road to recovery of education system. So what I thought I would be really curious to hear from you. Could you maybe highlight one change you think is needed in the disaster risk reduction related education in response to the COVID-19 pandemics? So do you think did this experience change our understanding for the systemic nature of risk, and what does it mean for our education? I don't know who would like to start. Yoshikawa-san?
Okay, I can start. Now, I think education system, I think we have like 2 different things. One is education for children. The other one is education for higher education. And I think they have different challenges or different perspective after the COVID-19. Yes, for the education for children, obviously, I think we had a problem to provide education equally or sustainably to the children. I think we never experienced this scale of this pandemic that the children cannot go to school, worldwide, not only the developed countries and developing countries. I think for the education for children, what we need to do is we need to prepare if this happens, because I think in this pandemic, schools were not prepared. They didn't have like online materials, and I think parents were not prepared. They don't have a good internet connection. They don't have a spaces. And I think children were not prepared because they always interact and learn together at school, but suddenly they learn from screens. And that's, for example, in my case of my children are not allowed to put their pictures, so they need to close the screen. So I think we learned a lot from this pandemic for the school, for the children. And education on the contrary, for education for higher education, is I think this COVID-19 was very unique cases that the government or scientists couldn't refer to the past practices, so that what we should do and what kind of data we should collect and how do we decide. We really didn't have these information. So we just need to have data available right now, and then to make a decision between scientists and government, not to make the situation worse. So I think this is a very good lessons for the higher educations, because in higher education, normally we have plenty of times and we have a lot of data, we take time to decide. But I think this time COVID-19, we really need to decide quick with a big uncertainty. So I think this is one of the perspectives that the higher education need to embrace in the futures. Yeah, we don't need, not all of them need to do this, but I think someone needs to have this mind in the science or higher educations, how we react in this very unique situation. Yeah, so this is I think mostly a personal battle. This is what I thought after the pandemic.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and thoughts. So I think looking at the time and looking at the fact that there are no questions in the chat, I would like to thank you to both speakers. Thank you very much for this excellent contribution. And I would like to hand over to Professor Sestra. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jita, for chairing this keynote session. I think it was very wonderful, keynote from both of the speakers. We learned about how can we utilize this education and research as a tool to, address the disaster risk reduction and sustainable development. And also it was very good to hear about the UNESCO's contribution to disaster risk reduction and future plans to mitigate the impact of this COVID-19 pandemic on the education system. Thank you, Mr. Soichiro Yashikawa-san. So with this, I would like to close this keynote session officially. And please, Nesma, it's your turn. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, respected speakers, our respected chair and respected moderator, for such an amazing and insightful session. I'm sure the participants as well as the speakers enjoyed with such an important discussion we had, and going through the pandemic and what next. I think this conclusion with this session has been such an impactful. So before we head to the closing session, I'd like to request all the participants here in the plenary hall to turn on their videos because we'll be taking a group picture. We are trying to create a collage of to make participants feel that they are really an important part. And thank you for being such an amazing audience for the Second International Symposium on Disaster Resilience and Sustainable Development. I'd like to request Gani to please coordinate with this. Thank you.
Okay, ready everyone. Please count with me. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Say cheese. Okay, one more slide. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Say cheese. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Neshma. I'm handing over it to you.
Thank you so much, Gani, for coordinating. I know it's been a long day for all the participants, but despite I could see such wide smiles making us in the AIT here in the main control room very happy indeed.